very much. Really nice to see so many familiar, friendly faces. So suppose that a life-saving drug that the government supplies is in short supply. There's enough to cure only one of a number of young adults who are afflicted by a fatal disease, which will soon kill all of them in the absence of treatment. So at least as long as we assume their circumstances are equal, it strikes many as intuitive that those charged with the allocation of this resource should hold a lottery that provides each with the highest equal chance of receiving this indivisible good. But why? Well, here's a plausible answer. Anyone who needs this drug has a legitimate claim to it, and since these young adults are in equal need of the drug, and since the government should treat them as equals, it follows that each has an equal claim to this resource. So the drug can't do any good for more than one person. All would be equally well off if it went to nobody, but that's because they'd all be dead equally. One can, however, distribute something of greater value to each than the certainty of an imminent death, namely the chance of living. For each person, the higher the chance, the greater its value, and hence it appears that one should satisfy their equal claims by giving each the highest equal chance of living. And this would strike many as a fair and reasonable means of treating people as equals. Now, giving everyone a lottery ticket is not necessarily going to give something that each person values to the same extent in terms of their welfare, but it will equalize resources by satisfying the Dworkin's envy test. So once the lottery tickets with equal chances are distributed, no one will have any reason to swap his lottery ticket with anyone else's. So it does satisfy sort of Dworkinian equality. Now, what I want to do today is consider a few potent challenges to the case that I've just made for distribution by lot. Now, these all say that basically the chance of receiving the good at issue, the chance that we've been talking about, is lacking in value or otherwise insignificant or irrelevant in comparison with actually receiving the good. And I'm going to really spend a lot of time unpacking different interpretations of this passage from Caspar Hare. Now, this is actually mainly in the context of a paper on statistical versus identified lives. And Hare himself doesn't actually place a lot of weight on this particular passage. It is, however, a passage in which he criticizes Norman Daniels' view that we ought to give people equal chances, and he does actually apply this to a lottery. So he does use this in order to try to dismiss the claim that we ought to give equal chances in lotteries of the sort that I've been discussing. So this is basically the sort of prime example of a challenge to lotteries I'm going to discuss today. So here, Hare is suggesting that chances are irrelevant since their contribution to a person's well-being pales in significance in comparison with the actual receipt of the good of living that's distributed by lot. So he asks, well, why isn't living the relevant good here rather than chances of living? And then he says, if I die, then I'm not significantly better off for having had a high chance of living. If I live, I'm not significantly worse off for having had a low chance of living. Now, in the first two parts of this talk, what I'm going to do is answer the above and related challenges to the relevance and significance of chances. So first, what I'm going to do is argue that the far greater significance of receiving all of an undivided good needn't undermine the case for equally lottery chances of the whole good as compared with an outcome involving equally divided portions of this good. And then what I'm going to do is argue that it mislocates the value of lottery chances to assume that they must contribute in themselves to a person's well-being. Rather, their significance primarily resides in their expected instrumental value in delivering goods of independent value. And then what I'll do sort of after I've made these two responses, in the last part of my talk, I'm going to provide an account of when distribution by lot is perfectly fair, in spite of the inevitability of an unequal outcome among equal claimants. And here I'm going to part company with John Broome, who says that lotteries are never perfectly fair, but lotteries involve a trade-off between realizing perfect fairness and satisfying people's claims or enhancing utility. So in the case of the life-saving drug with which I opened this talk, there's no division into equal portions which renders the drug other than worthless. The best we can do is provide equal chances of the entire drug, and hence in this drug case, we're driven to the proposal that we should distribute this good by lot. Now, what I want to consider now is cases in which even basically when you divide the good, it still remains, when you divide the good in equal portions, these portions still retain significant use value. I want to say even cases like that, in cases where division doesn't render the good worthless, there remains a case for distributing chances of the undivided good rather than dividing the good in portions. And so I ask you to consider the following, the following two cases, which will figure fairly prominently in the remainder of this talk. So first case, called life extension. So here's the case. Unless they receive a life-extending good, 100 people now aged 20 will all die at the age of 81 after having previously enjoyed excellent health. Now, suppose that each person would either have a 1 in 100 chance of 100 more months, which is 8.3 more years, in excellent health, which would take them to just past the age of 89, 81 to 89. That's one possibility, 1 in 100 chance of 100 more months, or a certainty of a 1/100th portion of 100 months, which would yield a life extension of 1 more month in excellent health, from 81 years to 81 years plus a month. Now, in a case like this, each might rationally prefer a 1 in 100 chance of 8.3 more years to the certainty of an extra month, and this in spite of the fact that an extra month of life is of significant positive value. It's not a trivial good. Second case, suppose that each of 500 Americans of somewhat above average income and wealth could either have a 1 in 500 chance of $50,000 or a certainty of $100, which is 1/500th of 50,000. Now, in this case as well, everyone might rationally prefer the lottery over the certainty of an equal portion. And this need not be because they would regard an extra $100 as worthless. They might all regard such a relatively modest sum as worthwhile rather than wholly trivial. They would, say, purchase something useful and enjoyable with this $100. Let's also stipulate that their preference for a lottery is not on account of any desperate need for $50,000. Not, say, the case that they need that much money in order to save up for a life-saving operation in the United States, or to jump the queue in the United States. And let's suppose that this $50,000 would be useful, say, for a down payment on a house, even though their current rental arrangement is perfectly adequate, or say a nice home improvement, even though their house isn't in any significant disrepair. Now, these examples illustrate that an equal portion of the good might be worth less to each person than an equal chance of receiving the whole good, even when the equal portion is of significant or at least non-trivial value. And I think one can draw on this observation to provide an initial response to Casper Hare's suggestion, and to remind you of the suggestion that what we value is living rather than a lottery chance of living. So recall that he says, if I live, then I'm not significantly worse off for having had a low chance of living. Now, I grant that when one's lottery chance of living is relatively low, the value of that chance will pale into insignificance in comparison with the benefit of living that's bestowed on the winner of the lottery. So the winner of the life extension lottery, for example, would value the extra 100 months of life he receives far more highly than the merely 1 in 100 lottery chance of receiving these 100 more months. One cannot, however, infer from this that what we value is living rather than chances of living. Now, this is because similar claims of relative insignificance can be made regarding the certainty rather than the chance of living for a greater rather than a lesser number of months. Now, a 1 in 100 chance of living 100 more months pales in significance in comparison with actually living 100 more months, but so does living only 1 extra month in comparison with living 100 more months. Moreover, as this life extension example illustrates, it might be rational for everyone to prefer the 1 in 100 chance of living 100 more months to the certainty of 1 more month. And hence, one cannot infer from the fact that one greatly prefers the whole prize of the lottery of many more years of life, that what one values is living rather than chances of living. Now, that's an initial response to Hare's challenge, but I think further insights can be unearthed from that passage that I quoted a moment ago, which might be thought to support the claim that living in the tangible goods of life, rather than the chance of those goods, is what we should care about. And so what I'm going to do now is respond to further challenges, I think, that we can unearth from the passage from Hare. Now, the distribution of equal lottery chances to receive a tangible good has been condemned as a pale substitute for actually getting the good, on grounds that the value of a lottery chance is ephemeral. So once the winnings of the lottery are distributed, the value of the lottery chance appears to evaporate. Now, the exchange value of a lottery ticket, for example, its resale value also evaporates after the point at which winnings are distributed. Now, of course, the goods that a lottery distributes might also be ephemeral. So one's lottery winnings might consist of a dessert served at a restaurant, or the pleasures of an orgy, which are soon forgotten on account of the quantity of drugs supplied for consumption in tandem. I gave this paper in New Orleans. So. Now, the goods under consideration in the two cases I introduced earlier, however, 8.3 years of extra life or $50,000 are not ephemeral. Now, here's a suggestion which draws on these observations. Perhaps it's the ephemeral nature of the value of lottery chances in comparison with the persisting value of the goods that at least some lotteries distribute, which explains why lottery chances seem insignificant in comparison with and swamped by the value of the goods that the lottery distributes. In other words, perhaps such transience of lottery chances provides the underlying rationale for the following remark of Hare's on behalf of the significance of living rather than chances of living. So he says, if I die, then I'm not significantly better off for having had a high chance of living. If I live, I'm not significantly worse off for having had a low chance of living. Now, in a challenge that draws attention to the transience of the good of a lottery, David Wasserman poses a dilemma for believers in the value of lottery chances. He begins by noting that typically the value conferred by the probabilistic shares in a lottery is shared only briefly before passing to a single claimant. He then asks whether the value of this lottery chance increases the longer it's held by the recipient. Now, it seems that both positive and negative answers to this question appear to have perverse implications for the fairness of lotteries. A positive answer is regarded as perverse because it would then appear that the lottery's value increases the longer one waits before revealing the winner. But Wasserman says we normally seek to resolve disputes over goods as soon as possible, or at least whenever convenient. We find no independent value in delaying the revelation of the winner of the lottery. Now, a negative answer is regarded as perverse because it would seem to imply that we provide greater value by running many lotteries in quick succession. For example, by conducting a lottery with multiple draws consisting of as many semi-final stages as possible, since these stages would confer additional valuable odds on some claims. Now, before responding to Wasserman's specific challenges, what I want to do is offer the following reply, which applies more generally to any objection of transience to the case for dividing by lot. Now, I believe that the ephemeral value of lotteries is explained by the fact that this value typically consists almost entirely of its instrumental utility in delivering a tangible good of independent value. Now, this is not quite the claimed chance instrumentalism that Richard and Ori argue against. So I'm not saying that lotteries have only instrumental value. They might have non-instrumental value. So Richard and Ori consider a case in which someone doesn't care to receive a watch from someone has say a twin sibling, right? The father's got a watch, and the one sibling doesn't really care about the watch. The father decides to give the watch to the other sibling. Even though the one sibling doesn't value the watch, he's outraged by the fact that the father just gives it to the other sibling. And then the father realizes that he's outraged, so decides to toss a coin in order to give them each an equal chance. And the thought is, well, even if you don't value the lottery for its instrumental value in delivering the watch because you don't value the watch, you might value it for its symbolic value in sort of expressing the father's equal concern for each sibling. I mean, not sure whether I accept this particular example. I mean, if the father knew that the one person didn't value the watch, then not clear whether it would make sense for him to be, giving them an equal chance. But in any event, so sort of the other thing on that. So Richard and Ori's chance instrumentalism also considers two respects in which lotteries might have instrumental value. One is the respect which I've been talking about, namely actually delivering the good. But then Richard and Ori also say that lotteries might have instrumental value, which is of a purely epistemic nature in giving us some sort of reason to update our beliefs. And I'm not going to be talking about lottery instrumental value in that other respect. So digression. So basically, the ephemeral value of lotteries, I think, is explained by the fact that this value, end of digression. The ephemeral value of lotteries is explained by the fact that this value typically consists almost entirely of its instrumental utility in delivering a tangible good of independent value. Once this instrumental value has been deployed and is either delivered or failed to deliver the good, whatever value it had has been exhausted. And to explain what I'm talking about, I think it might be useful to consider the analogy of a delivery service, which conveys an item of value such as a pizza. Now, the delivery service is a value insofar as it's instrumental to the delivering of the item when it's ordered. It's valuable because it makes one's receipt of the good possible and more valuable insofar as it makes it more probable. And it lacks any value above and beyond that. One would rather have a pizza actually delivered from a service with very low reliability than a failed delivery from a service with a very high reliability. But this fact does not impugn the instrumental value of a delivery service. The same, I think, goes for the instrumental value of a lottery. In neither case is the fact that the value of the good is ephemeral, because purely instrumental to the delivery of the good implies that this value is insignificant. Now, having traced the primary significance of lotteries to their instrumental value in delivering tangible goods, I think we're now in a position to answer Wasserman's specific challenges. So waiting before declaring the winner or conducting multiple semifinal stages rather than resolving things with a single draw does nothing to enhance the instrumental value of the lottery in delivering the good. And this is why such practices come across as pointless rather than adding value. Analogously, it doesn't follow from the fact that the delivery service is valuable that the longer the delivery takes, the greater its value. I mean, here the opposite is true. Similarly, it doesn't increase the value of such a service for the good to be delivered by a sequence of different carriers. And hence, I think the recognition of the instrumental value of lotteries in delivering the good of independent value provides an answer to these challenges of Wasserman's. I think the instrumental value of a lottery chance also explains why, in Hare's words, if I die, then I'm not significantly better off for having had a high chance of living, and also if I live, I'm not significantly worse off for having had a low chance of living. Well, if I die, then it turns out that my lottery chance of living was merely a high expected instrumental value in delivering the good, yet its actual instrumental value turns out to be zero. And since I value a lottery chance only as a means of delivering this good to me, I'll have no reason to persist in valuing it once the lottery has failed to deliver the good, even though it was rational to place high value on this high chance in prospect. And similarly, if I live, then it turns out that my lottery chance was merely of low expected instrumental value in Hare's example, yet its actual instrumental value turns out to be very high. Now, Wasserman's challenge is drawn from an article whose memorable title, "Let Them Eat Chances," is itself an expression of skepticism regarding the value of a lottery as a good that's distributed. And similar skepticism is also manifest in an article by Tim Henning in his observation that giving someone a chance to receive, say, a kidney is not to give them a kidney to some degree, nor is it a way to give them some part of a kidney, whatever good that might do. An appreciation of the instrumental value of lotteries provides answers to these forms of skepticism. Although the chance of receiving a kidney that a lottery confers does not in itself achieve either of these things that Henning lists, it remains of expected instrumental value in delivering the entire kidney. And similarly, although a lottery chance is not itself edible, there remains an expected instrumental value in delivering a tangible good which can itself be enjoyed. And I think a recognition of the instrumental value of a lottery also provides an answer to Henning's claim that the only relevance of lottery chances is as weights in calculating expected value, weights that change to 0 or 1 once the outcome is known. Lottery chances involve such weights that change to 0 or 1 once the outcome is known. But if that were their only relevance, then one wouldn't be able to distinguish such lottery chances from the epistemic chances between 0 and 1 of our possession of a good that simply induce these epistemic chances by the lowering of a veil, which renders us ignorant of the fact regarding whether we already possess this good. So unlike a change in expected value, which arises simply from coming to know a fact of which one was previously ignorant because a veil that has obscured that fact has been lifted, a lotteries of instrumental value is a causal means of actually delivering an outcome involving receipt of a good of tangible value. The value of a lottery chance consists of the expected instrumental value in delivering such a good. And this value is above and beyond the calculation of expected value that merely reflects the degree of our ignorance of the outcome. Now, a recognition of the expected instrumental value of a lottery provides an answer to some further grounds for skepticism regarding the significance of a lottery chance. And these grounds can be gleaned from the passage from Hare, to which I again return. Remember, he says, if I die, then I'm not significantly better off for having had a high chance of living. If I live, then I'm not significantly worse off for having had a low chance of living. Now, Hare's denial that one is made significantly better off or worse off by lottery chances might be interpreted as a denial that chances of goods such as life, rather than a longer life itself, make any significant contribution to one's well-being. So among those who endorse a preference satisfaction account of well-being, it might be regarded as straightforward to establish that having a lottery chance advances one's well-being. One can simply point to the rational, self-interested preferences people have for such chances. It will, however, be more of a challenge to explain the contribution of chances to well-being if one rejects a preference satisfaction account in favor of an experiential account of well-being. There is, moreover, a venerable school of philosophical thought tracing back as far as Epicurus, according to which there's no such thing as an unexperienced increase or decrease in one's well-being. So maybe, I don't know, should we close the windows? We don't want to experience, well.
Do you think it goes both windows? But also the both windows thing? Yeah. I'm not sure how. I'll just worry about.
I think we tried doing it into.
Okay, so I think we're going to reply to this doubt as follows. We can grant, if only for the sake of argument, that there cannot be an unexperienced increase in one's well-being, while also insisting that chances are of prudential value, so long as there are chances of experiencing an increase in one's well-being. Even if having such a chance does not in and of itself make a contribution to one's well-being, coming into possession of a chance of a good is nevertheless in one's interest on account of its expected instrumental value in delivering goods involving experience. And for parallel reasons, a trustee asks in your interest if he enrolls in a low-cost because highly subsidized health insurance policy, even if you're unaware of this and you end up never needing to make use of this policy. It would also be contrary to your interest for your employer to drop you from your company's health insurance plan, even if you don't learn that you've been dropped and therefore don't suffer any anxiety, and even if it doesn't wrong you in the sense of doing something they're obliged not to do. Can people hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, good, yeah. The unpleasantness and the anxiety that you would feel if you discovered that you were dropped does not exhaust the setback to your interests in being dropped. So this anxiety is a rational response to the fact that your interests have been set back by the loss of security to which the withdrawal of the insurance policy gives rise. The security one loses is protection against the experienced ills of untreated illness or disability on the one hand, or financial bankruptcy on the other hand. And similarly, even if the conferral of a lottery chance does not as such increase anyone's well-being, they should be distributed equally to those with equal claims. And this is because they promote their interests by conferring advantages as constituted by their expected instrumental value in delivering experience that increases in well-being among equal claimants. So what I want to do now is turn to the sort of last topic of my talk, which is question, when might lotteries be perfectly fair? And recall Broom says never when they're distributing an indivisible good, but I think that even when we're distributing an indivisible good, there are cases in which lotteries are perfectly fair. What I'm going to do is provide an account of some conditions which are necessary and sufficient to ensure that a distribution by lot perfectly realizes this value of fairness. Okay, so let's begin by stipulating that in the case of a particular good, everyone is indifferent between a 1 over n chance of the entire good and a 1 over n portion of that good for certain, where n is the number of people in the lottery. And hence the 1 over n portion of the good is, in this case, everyone's so-called certainty equivalent of a 1 over n chance of the good. Now, suppose that a distribution of equal portions, 1 divided by the number of people of this good, would perfectly achieve fairness among equal claimants, as Broom claims it would. So the question now, which I want to pose, is, well, why wouldn't a lottery with a 1n chance for all also perfectly achieve fairness, given that by stipulation, each values this chance to the same degree as the certain outcome, which Broom maintains would perfectly realize fairness? Well, here are some grounds to challenge the claim that such gambles involving lottery chances, which are valued the same as equal portions, would perfectly realize fairness. You might say the equal portion and the equal chance are equivalent merely ex ante, yet we know in advance that the lottery will involve inequality. I mean, suppose that there are 2 gambles, the same expected prudential value for each, involving equal size risks to each, but in one, the risks are perfectly correlated, and the other, the risks are inversely correlated. Now, even though these 2 gambles are ex ante equivalent in their expected prudential value, the one with perfectly correlated risks, where people end up the same level, so, heads, both people win, tails, both people lose, gamble with such perfectly correlated risk is fairer than a gamble with inversely correlated risk, heads, one person wins, tails, and the other person loses, and vice versa. Since the inversely correlated gamble guarantees an unequal outcome. This sort of traces back to an example of Peter Diamond in response to Harsanyi's defense of utilitarianism. And you might say, for similar reasons, equal portions might be more fair than an ex ante equivalent gamble whose outcome is guaranteed to be unequal. But the mere fact that an outcome will give rise to inequality does not, however, provide sufficient grounds to condemn it as unfair. And that's one of the main lessons of luck egalitarianism. The unequal outcome arises through no fault or choice of anyone's, then it's unfair, but an unequal outcome might be perfectly fair if it arises through the choices of individuals. And so in the parable of the ant and the grasshopper, these 2 individuals are morally responsible agents for their differing choices regarding work, leisure, and consumption. Then if that their mere differing choices provides a full explanation for the ant's abundance and the grasshopper's destitution, it follows that this inequality of outcome is fair. Now, more to the point of our current discussion, we can also illustrate the luck egalitarian fairness of unequal outcomes with cases involving risk. The inequalities arising from gambles might be fair instances of what Dworkin has labeled option luck, which is roughly luck to which one has exposed oneself as a result of one's voluntary choices, in contrast with brute luck, which is unchosen and unavoidable. And so what I want to do now is consider cases in which an unequal outcome is a result of the choice of each to gamble. So what we're going to do is consider some variants of the 2 examples I introduced earlier involving life extension and money. So suppose now that each individual has the option of choosing for herself whether to receive a 1/n portion of the good for certain, or also 1/n chance of the entire good of 8.3 more years of life on the one case and $50,000 in the other case. So suppose now, moreover, that each person regards the lottery as more valuable than equal portions. Now, if each rationally chooses the lottery option, then these are cases in which the resulting inequalities in outcome would constitute, I would argue, perfectly fair instances of option luck. Now, it's crucial here that the lottery chances that different people are provided involve equal odds. So the mere fact that each would prefer the lottery chance they're offered to an equal portion would be insufficient to render unequal lottery chances perfectly fair. Such a lottery would remain unfair because it fails to pass the envy test to which I referred earlier, thereby failing to provide equally valuable chances to all with equally strong claims. Okay, so that's now second variant. Suppose that it's not possible to provide equal portions for some and equal lottery chances for other. It's not possible for different people to choose lotteries and equal portions. Rather, now suppose that the good must either be divided equal portions for all or in equal lottery chances for all. Now, if as before, everyone prefers the lottery, and let's suppose they express this preference, then the good ought to be divided by lot rather than into equal portions. And again, the resulting inequalities of outcome would remain perfectly fair instances of option luck. I think we should reach the same conclusion, even if nobody has had the opportunity to express their preference for a lottery or an equal portion, yet we actually know that everyone prefers the lottery. Here, the good ought to be divided by lot rather than equal portions. The resulting inequalities would constitute perfectly fair option luck on the grounds, among others, that we know that each would have chosen such a lottery involving equal chances if provided with the opportunity. Okay, so now, final variant. Suppose that a division of goods into equal 1/n portions is not possible. We cannot divide the 8.3 extra life years into such equal portions of 1 more month for 100 people. These years must all go to a single person if they go to anyone. It's an indivisible good. And similarly, suppose that we can't divide the $50,000 into equal portions of $100 for each. The money has to go to a single person if it goes to anyone. But let's suppose that the preferences of the individuals are as we've been assuming before. In this case, the following counterfactual is true. Even if it were possible to divide the good into such equal portions, everyone would still prefer a lottery involving equal chances. Even if the lottery is imposed for lack of an actual alternative involving equal portions, it might remain perfectly fair on grounds, among others, that it satisfies the envy test, and everyone would have agreed to it rather than to equal portions had there been a choice between these two options. Here we have a hypothetical choice, but not from under an imposed veil which deprives everyone of knowledge of their circumstances and their conceptions of the good and the preferences that arise from their conception of the good. In this case, and the previous ones involving hypothetical choice, it's the fact that this option is preferred rather than appeal to any appeal to consent, which I think is of normal significance. I would maintain that a lottery involving equal 1/n chances needn't be regarded in this case as a second best in the dimension of fairness to an impossible equal division of the good into valuable 1/n portions. Rather, such a lottery would perfectly realize fairness. And this claim marks a departure from Broom's account of the fairness of lotteries. On his view, a lottery which distributes a scarce, indivisible good among people with equal claims is inevitably unfair to at least some degree because some candidates will get the good and others will not. Now, on account of this fact, Broom maintains that the distribution of none of this good to anyone is the only feasible course of action that will perfectly achieve fairness. And Broom also maintains that one needs to balance and trade off the demands of fairness against the competing demands of overall satisfaction. He says that in some circumstances, no doubt, it will be very important to be fair. In others, fairness may be outweighed by expediency. And when fairness is outweighed by expediency, an indivisible good should be allocated to a single person by lot rather than to nobody, and sacrifice of perfect fairness to the satisfaction of claims. If, however, a hypothetical because unfeasible distribution of the indivisible good into equal 1/n portions constitutes a benchmark which is dispreferred by all to a lottery which presents each with highest equal odds. Why isn't the lottery perfectly fair? In order to account for the perfect fairness of such a lottery, I need to draw attention to something special about the two cases under discussion involving life extension and money, namely the fact in these two particular cases of the benchmark of a sufficiently good risk-free point of reference involving equal outcomes with which to compare the gamble of a lottery. Okay, well, I don't want to, so I don't want to go beyond 15 minutes past the hour. So, I might just sort of summarize. So remember the initial case that I introduced, an indivisible life-saving good. Now, in this particular case, there's no sufficiently good risk-free alternative to a lottery involving equal outcomes. The actual risk-free alternative is one in which all die young. And if we now imagine a hypothetical certainty equivalent to a lottery, I mean, basically, if it's a lottery with a fairly low chance of living, the certainty equivalent of that, is going to be a fairly degraded life. I mean, you would accept a certainty of a life which is only of a fairly low value for that to be equivalent to a lottery chance of full health for the rest of one's life, where the lottery chance is fairly low. And in these particular cases, people are forced by the insufficiency of an alternative involving certainty, either actual or in this case, hypothetical. And in these particular cases, even though it may be rational to gamble, the rationality of gambling doesn't fully transform unfair brute bad luck into fair option luck, given the lack of a sufficiently good risk-free alternative of equal portions, either hypothetically or actually. And so I'm going to sort of skip over this particular example, but I present an example where the alternative does involve the sort of certainty benchmark to a lottery does involve a sufficiently good risk-free alternative. And I also, as I mentioned, I think in both the case of life extension and the case of money, sort of built into those cases, that the outcome in which, say, a month extra is distributed to people, certainly that's a sufficiently good risk-free alternative, because we know then that you'll live 81 years in a month in excellent health. And then I also, having the certainty of $100 is a sufficiently good risk-free alternative as well. Now, here's the explanation of significance of having a sufficiently good risk-free equal benchmark. When the risk-free benchmark is sufficiently good in absolute terms, then one isn't compelled by the undesirability of the risk-free benchmark to take the gamble. Rather, one is merely attracted to a gamble by the lure of its greater expected value. Now, one might say that perhaps the value of equality is realized to a greater degree when there's a division of a tangible good into equal portions. You might say, well, if we're really concerned about equality, we should actually make sure that we distribute equal portions rather than equal chances, when these equal chances guarantee an unequal outcome. Well, maybe that's true of equality. Nevertheless, what I've tried to argue is that an equal probability lottery is a perfectly fair procedure of allocation when it provides a distribution of equal chances to equal claimants, which all rationally prefer to division into equal portions, which constitutes a sufficiently good risk-free alternative to that lottery. And let me now just, in closing, mention this nice case of James Fishkin's. Here's some observations regarding the light my account sheds on a fairly memorable example of James Fishkin's, involving a random reassignment of newborns to different parents at birth, so that each has the same chance of being raised by wealthy parents as any other. Now, Fishkin maintains that equal life chances, in a quite precise sense, will result from this arrangement, since any newborn's chance of receiving any highly valued position would be precisely equal to that of any other newborn infant. Now, few, however, would maintain that such a birth lottery would render the outcomes fair, no matter how great these inequalities. And as Brian Barry has observed, surely there's something very weird about the notion of fair equal opportunity, such that a system of unequal opportunity, for example, massive differences in life chances depending on one's parentage, could be magically transformed into one of fair equality of opportunities simply by switching babies in their cradles and leaving everything else the same. Now, my account can explain why such a birth lottery would fail to render things perfectly fair. The hypothetical benchmark of a certainty equivalent involving equal outcomes would need to involve a fairly dire state of affairs for it to be rational to reject it in favor of a gamble involving an equal chance of being born into different places in a rigid caste system or some other highly unequal arrangements. And therefore, such a lottery would not be chosen against the benchmark of a sufficiently good risk-free alternative. And for this reason, the choice would be less than completely free. Rather, it would to some extent be forced by necessity. Insofar as the choice to engage in a lottery was forced, the complaint of unfairness of the inequality of its outcome is not completely silenced by the fact that the lottery was chosen. It's not completely silenced even when this lottery involves equal odds among equal claimants and therefore satisfies the envy test. If, by contrast, entry into such a lottery was fully free by virtue of the fact that it was chosen against the benchmark of a sufficiently good risk-free alternative, that eliminates any complaint of unfairness regarding the inequality of the outcome. The fact that this particular lottery was freely chosen against the background of equal opportunity rather than forced by necessity renders it perfectly fair. Okay, so that's our argument.